Hello and welcome to FP Live. I'm Ravi Agrawal, Foreign Policy's Editor-in-Chief. There was a moment right after Donald Trump was elected last November when CEOs were feeling hopeful. They were looking forward to deregulation, they were optimistic about tax cuts, and they felt Trump wouldn't actually impose the blanket tariffs he was proposing. Except it turns out maybe he would, or maybe not, or maybe he will. Well, markets do not like uncertainty, and after soaring in the early weeks since November, the broad S&P 500 index has since given up all of its gains. It is now in correction territory, which in technical terms represents a drop of more than 10% since its peak. In a moment, I will speak with someone with direct access to America's top CEOs who really understands what's on their minds and how they think about policy. If this is your first time on FP Live, welcome. Here's the deal. These are usually half-hour conversations with experts and policymakers. We will take some subscriber questions throughout. If you want to join in, just hit the subscribe button. Use the code FP Live for a great first-time discount. We are also a podcast, which I urge you to follow wherever you get your audio. So, how do CEOs feel about Trump? If they're unhappy with his policies, what can they actually do? I have just the right guest today. Jeffrey Sonnenfeld is a professor at the Yale School of Management. He also founded the Chief Executive Leadership Institute, through which he runs salons and meetings attended by America's top CEOs. Jeff, welcome to FP Live.
Thank you very much, Ravi. It's an honor to be with you.
The honor is ours. So, I want to start with how CEOs are feeling about Trump. And beyond the stock market, I think some data could be useful here. So, you ran this meeting at Yale, attended by about 100 top CEOs from JP Morgan, Pfizer, Dell, American Airlines, wide range of industries. 60% of them identified as Republicans, and you surveyed them on many issues. I want to highlight four questions for our audience here. 67% felt the Trump administration will be bad for the economy. 85% oppose his approach to tariffs. 94% worry those tariffs will be inflationary. And 85% think the current uncertainty in US government is a gift to China. Jeff, this was not how CEOs felt 2 months ago. We'll come to the national security elements in a bit, but focusing on the economy first, what's changed here?
Well, you've framed it magnificently. You not only cited the statistics exactly accurately, but you also positioned what's paradoxical here, Ravi. So I should be interviewing you. You've nailed it so well, but I will add a little bit since you're nice enough to
You're the
invite me.
guest.
And that is that there are some parallels that many in the media, except you, have missed between now and 2017 at this point. Is throughout American history, since the founding of the Republican Party, literally, with Abraham Lincoln, those Union League clubs in New York and Washington, Philadelphia, Boston, New Haven, and things, those Union League clubs were clubs of business leaders in those regions to stand behind this new Republican president in support of the Union. And whether or not it was William Howard Taft or Herbert Hoover or Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, Bush 41, Bush 43, failed candidates like Mitt Romney, John McCain, they solidly stood behind them, the top CEOs in the nation. What hit a wall in 2016 is that Trump didn't get diminished support. He got zero. Not a single major CEO, single Fortune 100 CEO supported Donald Trump. A huge break from what the Republican Party usually enjoyed. But just like you described it, there was a surge of excitement
Hmm.
after the election in late November, December, building in January, and it was dissipated. In that case, by August, it had fallen apart. And I could explain what was parallel then and now. But just like people were talking about how now, as we rocket forward, like 2020, he'd had only two major CEOs supported him, and that fell back down to zero in 2024 until the near horrific assassination in Butler, Pennsylvania, when Elon Musk parachuted in. So they had a grand total of one major CEO who did. There's a Fortune 100 firms. somebody may say, well, how about Steve Schwarzman or something like that? Well, Steve Schwarzman, Blackstone is a great company, but it's not a Fortune 100, a Fortune 200, Fortune 300, a Fortune 400. But they're a great company, but he's not one of the top leaders. And what they, but they did get that enthusiasm, just as you suggested, whether or not it was
Hmm.
relaxation of tax issues, regulatory rollbacks, and very few of them took seriously the enforcement, let alone the expansion and widespread net of tariffs being tossed out there.
So,
So
but
that's the
Jeff,
thing.
I have a question here, and I get the trajectory you're describing, from lack of support to, some optimism after November 2024 because of deregulation, because of tax cuts, and maybe fatigue with what they had before. Here's the thing I just don't get on tariffs. Trump has been consistent about tariffs. I mean, he took out ads on this very issue in the New York Times in the 1980s. Why is it that CEOs have been so reluctant to believe him when he says he's going to do something and then he actually goes out and does that?
Because nobody thought that tariffs were going to be driven by tantrums. They thought that rather than Trump tantrums, it would be strategic. And in fact, one other piece of data to add to your great summary is 85% of CEOs do believe that the United States has a fair trade, free trade issue, that they think there is some unfair dumping. Even our friends in Canada, who is a wonderful country, we have tons of friends there, and they're as great an ally as the United States can have. Still, the 1,000% jump in say aluminum and steel coming in from there was not because of increased production that happened in the course of a handful of years. That is being washed through from other countries, from Europe, frankly, Russia, and there's some strong data suggest even from, of all things, Ukraine and China, is that there's the metals coming in were a problem from there. There are parts coming in from Mexico, not to mention just cars, BMWs or something in particular, coming in that were seem to be evading normal trade issues. So the Mexico and Canada became targeted, but they thought that this would be specific strategic tariffs, not across the board issues where during that session you mentioned, we had a CNBC correspondent in there with us who was reading every 8 to 12 minutes. He was reading a different post on Truth Social where Trump was reversing what he just said before. So as you mentioned, it's not just the widespread cross the board nature of all tariffs all the time on everything, which is ridiculous. But it was also the head spinning volatility of the uncertainty that was problematic. So yeah, Biden too kept tariffs on certainly sensitive chips into China, and there are certain areas where the tariffs made sense, but not the way Trump's approaching it to try to impose it on Colombia just out of vindictiveness and vanity because they didn't want military transports bringing in immigrants with 54 people on a plane that holds 400.
Hmm. One of the other polls you ran of this group of about 100 CEOs was about how much the stock market would need to decline for them to speak out collectively. So I said it's fallen about 10% so far. Nearly half of the group you surveyed said it would have to fall by 20% to speak up. About a fifth of the group said stocks would have to fall by 30% before they took a public stand. Is it usual for American CEOs to be this cautious about their role?
Well, as actually the CEOs have been the most courageous voices in American society. The social change in the 1960s and 1970s were led by interfaith clergy linking arms at the front of lines in protests to trade union leaders, and campus voices, professional associations, the AMA, the ABA, and others of that sort. And now they're all dormant. They're all silent on the sidelines, pointing to these CEOs. These CEOs who, for the most part, are not the multi-billionaire oligarchs. That's just a handful of them. These people are very well paid, but they're well paid hired hands working at the behest of boards of directors. and they can't get out in front unless they hear from their stakeholders. If their stakeholders are cowardly, as most in the clergy are, as we know the legal profession has been, and across the board, the campuses have this nonsensical shield of cowardice called institutional neutrality that gives them air cover. There's nothing that's so much more complicated about the diverse constituency of a university than there is of any other pillar of American society. So the CEOs are out there on a limb, and they're the only ones in 2017. They're the ones who, after they realized the way they were being worked for photo ops, walked out en masse from Donald Trump's 3 Business Advisory Council. And they never came back till now. That's never happened in American history for the commander in chief to have a call to action, the American business community, for them to walk out and not come back. That
I,
would,
so I have to ask you here because public perception is very different from what you just said. I think most people, the image that is seared in their mind from the start of this year is that of all of the top CEOs showing up for Donald Trump's inauguration, very much there for a photo op and a show of support. And these are CEOs, many of them are billionaires, you're right, but they're CEOs. They run companies like Google or Amazon.
These are people who, for the most part, with the exception of the Google example you used, is the only hired hand CEO in those photo ops. The others are like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk. These are people that are the multi-billionaire controlling interest owners as tech titans. In 2017, we similarly had business leaders who again, and the people we just mentioned, didn't, with the exception of Musk, they did not support his candidacy. They all supported Kamala Harris. There's nothing wrong out of patriotism for them to try to make, and we encourage them to try to make Donald Trump as successful a president as they could be. Once he's elected president, he's supposed to be the president of all people, all citizens, all institutions, and they wanted to help him. The fact that they went off to Mar-a-Lago to meet with him, whether or not it was for enlightened self-interest of their own business enterprise, or to work on larger causes that were sort of in the interest of the nation's economy, there's nothing wrong with that as long as they weren't taking on and sort of prostituting themselves, taking on social issues that they don't believe in, and they haven't done that. So what we saw is that those people also, many of them gave comparably sized donations to Joe Biden. They didn't go off to Wilmington, Delaware, or wherever to see him. But they went when Trump was in 2017. They didn't go to Mar-a-Lago. I was there. I saw what was happening. They went to Trump Tower. But that goodwill was dissipated in the course of 8 months after the Charlottesville equivocation of white nationalists with peaceful demonstrators. They walked out. What's happening in this case, it's happening 6, 7 months faster, that he's dissipated that goodwill because of the recklessness and the way he's handling these things. But just because of the fact that that Trumpaganda has sold the American public on this having a terrible economy under Biden, it doesn't make it so. You don't need to placate, you need to educate. And that's what the Democrats failed to do. And similarly, when it has to do with saying that the business leaders are behind them, the business leaders weren't behind them. We published those facts everywhere. We showed the data. It's on our websites, and we put all the charts out in the New York Times. Nothing's been challenged or falsified. Business leadership did not support Donald Trump, no matter how perhaps some of the populists on the left and the right that have a common interest in taking down institutions portray it differently. Doesn't make it so. And, you know, 12% of the country believes that Judge Judy is on the Supreme Court, and they 16% think we never landed on the moon. Just because there's that perception doesn't make it so. It's important to challenge it with the facts. The CEOs didn't support him, and he's rapidly losing their support now, as you can just see in that group of 100 leaders that we had together. And you can see who their names were. Those exact people met right after we met in the business roundtable down in the basement. We met in Washington, actually, not on campus, but on a Yale facility in Washington. With the daylight and open dialogue, they took positions, they took votes, and they were very critical of the administration. Sitting basically in pews at the business roundtable with Trump there in the room, nobody wants to poke the bear. He has such a coercive, chilling effect. They're afraid of vindictiveness. So they went silent there. But they've taken positions on voting rights in the spring of 2021. They were the leaders. If your life depended on it, you couldn't name 3 clergy members who stepped out that took the leadership role. You couldn't name 2 or 3 trade union leaders who did. But it was the CEOs. I could give you 50 of them right now by name who went out on voting rights issues and took
Mm.
very strong positions and led to significant change in 2021.